Hi everybody, Andrew Cuneo here with a new YouTube deck tech. This time I want to go over a historic deck that I worked on off and on over the past, I don't know, several releases. And it's just a white weenie deck, but I think there's a couple of interesting card choices you can make to perhaps push, a white weenie based strategy over the top. People have played White Weenie in a variety of forms in Historic, and it's never really been super successful. There was maybe one point in time when the Memory Lapse decks were kind of the best deck in the format, and White Weenie was good against them, and maybe it had a little bit of a moment in the sun there. But I think that it does have a lot of tools, and it continues to get more tools as time goes on. And so I'm going to go over kind of the choices I made in constructing this list to try to get it to be a good choice for the current historic meta game, which I think is basically food decks, Phoenix decks, and then a little bit of blue-white control, a little bit of blue-white artifacts, a little bit of aura decks. I would say those are the main decks I would be expecting to face in a at the top of the ladder or in an arena open, which is actually what I'm preparing for. There's an arena open coming up this weekend, and this is one of the decks I'm considering playing in it. So to start, we've got kind of the core of any white creature deck that you're going to play in Historic, which you start with 4 Esper Sentinels, great card, and then you add some Thalias, because most decks in Historic play a lot of non-creature spells, so kind of taxing them is one of the biggest strengths of this deck. And then I've got 4 Thalia's Lieutenants, which is just a really great 2-drop. But it does pressure you to basically play all humans or almost all humans. As we're going to see, there's a couple of cards in my deck that aren't humans. And then in the 3-drop slot, I've got 4 Ranger-Captain of Eoses. This is another card that I think is from Historic Horizons. It was a Modern Horizons card that got added to Arena. So this card is interesting in that it encourages you to basically play with kind of a toolbox of 1-drops to go and get with it. That's the main value of the card, is it's a human that goes and finds you another 1-drop. So if you have a 1-drop that's good for whatever situation you're in, this is going to be a good play for you. It has a second ability where you can sack it and your opponent can't cast non-creature spells this turn. I found this to be a very, very tricky ability to use. Occasionally you get into a spot where you know that the only way your opponent can not die on your next turn is to cast a sweeper, and you've got an extra Ranger-Captain of Eos in play that you don't need to deal lethal damage next turn, and then it's kind of a no-brainer to sack it in their upkeep. But using it at other points in the game, you can get yourself into a lot of trouble if you're kind of sacking these and not leaving yourself with enough of a board to pressure your opponent. So you need to be really, you need to put a lot of thought into deciding when to sack this, I would say, as the game goes on. So those are kind of the core of the deck. And then let's get into some of the more interesting choices. You'll notice in the 4-drop slot, I have only the Wandering Emperor, which is a new card, and it's kind of proven to just be a great all-around Planeswalker. It's shown up a lot in control decks and Historic. It's shown up a lot in mid-range decks and Standard, also in kind of white weenie decks and Standard and Alchemy. So I want to see if it can, make the jump into a creature deck in Historic, which I think it's going to do fine. The only awkward thing about this is a Thalia deck, and my 4-drop is a non-creature spell, so Thalia does tax your own spells. So occasionally that's kind of an anti-synergy in the deck, but I think overall, Wandering Emperor is just a great card. So let's talk about some of the cards that aren't in the deck, and the first one's going to be Inquisitor Captain. Inquisitor. So this is a card that shows up in a lot of people's attempts at White Weenie in Historic. And it's certainly a good card. I think the problem with it, though, is that it's such a mid-range focused card. And Historic, you just need to be a little bit more aggressive or interactive. So I'm not super interested in playing that. And if you look at my true drops, I've got Containment Priest, which is a bit of interaction that's going to get in the way of Arclight Phoenixes. It's going to get in the way of Cauldron Familiars coming back from the graveyard. It stops Croxes from being escaped. It stops, if somebody's trying to actually do a reanimation strategy or an indomitable creativity strategy, it will stop those as well. So this is where my take on White Weenie and Historic goes a little bit different than most people's, because I'm just playing 4 Containment Priests in my main deck. I think it interacts pretty favorably with most of the decks you're trying to target, but it does also affect your own cards, so you can't play Containment Priest and Inquisitor Captain in your deck at the same time. Your Containment Priest will shut off your Captain. I mean, I guess you could if you wanted to, and occasionally you'll get lucky and you'll just have the Captain go and find the Containment Priest, but if you have to play the cards in the opposite order, it's really bad. So, for the same reason, Collected Company is another card that I am not playing, because Containment Priest shuts it off. Then, in the 3-drop slot, I've got 3 Adelines, because since I'm not playing the typical 4-drops, the Inquisitor Captains and the Collected Companies, I want to have a lot of hard hitters in my 3-drops. So I've got 3 Adelines. Adeline is great. Adeline in particular combos really well with Thalia's Lieutenant. Things get out of hand really quickly if you get to have an attacking Adeline with the Thalia's Lieutenant. The best draw for this deck, I would say, is Esper Sentinel into Thalia's Lieutenant into Adeline. Your opponent is under a tremendous amount of pressure to interact with what you're doing, or they're going to die really quickly. Looking at some of the other cards, so I've got 2 copies of Sigardian Evangel. I think this is definitely a historic power level card. It's a really great way to push through damage. It's a great way to spend a lot of mana in a turn if you happen to have drawn a lot of lands. It also works pretty well with Thalia's Lieutenant because it produces a lot of humans, and the humans, they're going to trigger the Thalia's Lieutenant, or if you play the Thalia's Lieutenant afterwards, all the Sigardian Evangel copies you were able to make are going to be 4/2s. So that's really nice there. I am only playing 2 copies. It's not really a card you want to draw a ton of copies of, because you want to play something better on turn 2. One card I'm not playing is Luminarch Aspirant. And that is because of the nerf that it received. So in Historic, you would have to play the nerfed version if you wanted to play with it. And I think the nerfed version makes it meaningfully enough weaker that I'm just not playing it. So, and also, as you can see, because I've chosen to play Containment Priest, I have a lot of other 2-drop options. Looking at the 1-drop options, I've got 4 Thraben Inspectors. I think that's basically mandatory in a White Weenie deck. It's just a great card with Thalia's Lieutenant. It's great to be able to go and get them with Ranger-Captain of Eos. It's great to, kind of build up a big battlefield with your Adeline. So just all-around great card. Here's a new inclusion, which is Inchblade Companion. This is not a human, which is important to note, but this is basically a target you can go and get with Ranger-Captain of Eos. This kind of functions like a Thraben Inspector in that you're getting a 1/1 body that you're then going to sink 2 mana into to gain a benefit, which in this case the benefit's going to be another copy of this card in play that doesn't have this cloning ability. Only the original version has the cloning ability. I tried this card in the Warriors deck that I tried in Alchemy, and I was actually reasonably impressed with it, to the point that I think it's probably worth including as a one-of. Like I said, it's very similar to Thraben Inspector in terms of how it affects the game. The one way that it is different is it can add more power to the board more quickly than Thraben Inspector. So if you're planning to set up an attack where you need one of your creatures to be +1/+1 bigger, this is definitely a better target to go get than Thraben Inspector with the Ranger-Captain of Eos. And also, just if your opponent's going to be doing a lot of blocking, if you can make a bunch of these insects, it's going to make it really hard for them to block you effectively. I've been reasonably happy with one copy of it so far. I've got 2 Hopeful Initiates in my deck. It's another human. There's a lot of artifacts and enchantments in Historic, so if you can get this to the point where you're removing counters, you're going to have good targets a lot of the time. And bear in mind, it does not have to be counters that you only got through training. You can remove counters from other creatures for this, so it works really well with Thalia's Lieutenant. I've got 2 of them. I don't know that it's a card you'd really ever want 4 of, but I think you certainly want at least 1. 2 seems like a good number to me. Got 1 Giant Killer. You definitely want to play 1 Giant Killer if you're playing 4 Ranger-Captain of Eoses. I mean, 1 at a minimum. If you really were expecting to play against a lot of bigger creatures, you would probably want to play 2. I don't think right now there's that many 4 power or greater creatures in Historic, so I'm only playing 1. And remember that this is also completely reasonable to play just as a 1-mana creature. If that's the only play you can make on turn 1, you should go ahead and make it. A lot of decks in Historic are going to plan to block at some point, or that maybe it's with the Shark Typhoon token, maybe it's with a Cauldron Familiar. Just the actual tapping ability, it's not good enough to make a card that you would play with on its own, but it is a reasonable card in a lot of situations. And then I've got 1 Dauntless Bodyguard, which is certainly a much worse card than Selfless Savior, but it's a human and it's also 2 power, so it hits a little bit harder. I wasn't willing to give up on the human synergy with Thalia's Lieutenant and play the Selfless Savior. And then the other non-human I have in my deck is Skyclave Apparition. So this card is always in competition with Brutal Cathar when you're constructing a deck. I mean, they're both legal in Standard right now. They're both legal in Historic. And if you're going to put one of the 2 in your deck, you need to decide between the 2 of them. Brutal Cathar has the obvious benefit that it's a human with Thalia's Lieutenant. But I think Skyclave Apparition is just the right choice for Historic for a couple of reasons. One is that you can hit non-creature permanents. So you can hit a Witch's Oven, you can hit a Trail of Crumbs, you can hit a Shadow Spear. And that matters a ton. The other thing that matters a lot is that if you're taking out a Dragon's Rage Channeler, usually Dragon's Rage Channeler decks are going to be playing Unholy Heat, so they'll have the opportunity to kill the Skyclave Apparition or the Brutal Cathar. And in those cases, you would much rather have them getting a 1/1 illusion than getting a Dragon's Rage Channeler back. I mean, the same thing with a lot of 2-mana plays that people might make, like a Dreadhorde Arcanist, or if a Kroxa got escaped or something like that. I think that you're generally the permanent exile and the ability to hit non-creatures, it makes the Apparition just a much better card than Brutal Cathar in Historic. Looking at the land base, I am playing with the nerfed version of Faceless Haven. It's still a reasonably strong card, and it is a human, so you can occasionally get counters on it with Thalia's Lieutenant, which is nice. Then obviously I have Snow-Covered Plains to go with Faceless Haven. I've got 1 Cave of the Frost Dragon and 1 Eiganjo as non-snow lands. I do have a fairly high land count in my deck. I am playing 23 lands in a deck that the curve does not, the curve stops at 4, and I don't even have that many 4-drops. But you do actually have a fair amount to do with your mana as the game goes on. You'll be cracking clues that you got from Thraben Inspector. You can sink mana into an Inchblade Companion. You can sink mana into Sigardian Evangel. You've got, some creature lands to activate. You can use a Eiganjo to get a blocker out of the way. I think that you certainly don't want to play fewer than 22 lands. I think that probably the right number of lands is 22 and a half. Here I've gone for 23. Looking at the sideboard, one of the most appealing parts of this deck is just having access to 4 Portable Holes in the sideboard. I think there's a lot of matchups where Portable Hole is just an exceptionally good removal spell, and being a deck that can just comfortably play 4 of them is great. This is another thing that you get when you don't try to play Collected Company or Inquisitor Captain. You're no longer really concerned about maintaining a particular creature count in your deck, which it probably you could, board portable holes and you wouldn't be that concerned. But it's nice to just not have that concern at all. And so portable hole, kind of the cards I'm looking to hit with this would certainly be things out of auras, things out of blue-white, like affinity decks. It's a great card, I think, against green-black food as well. So those are the main matchups for that card, I would say. Also, Fragment Reality, which is a card that's functionally very, very similar to Portable Hole. It's another new card, which I think is pretty good in Historic. I think it's not quite as good as Portable Hole in this deck, because in this deck you do want to be getting rid of people's 2-drops, like I said, and there are some decks where Fragment Realitying their 2-drop is going to give them a 1-drop, and the 1-drops are annoying because a lot of times the 1-drops can block your creatures. But as like a 5th Portable Hole, this card makes sense. Also, if you're playing against somebody who their deck does not have 1-drops in it, this card can get, very strong. I had a match where somebody was trying to transmogrify into play an Elesh Norn, and the rest of their deck was tokens, and I got to Fragment Reality the Elesh Norn, which was amazing. So I think that this card definitely has a role to play, but I would not be adding more copies and cutting portable holes. And you need to be very judicious when you're boarding this in. I would say it's not a card that you can never have in your deck if when you cast it, your opponent's going to get something, because it is an instant. If they have particularly strong permanents that you're Fragment Realitying, I wouldn't worry too much about giving them like kind of a low valuable permanent, but you need to kind of carefully weigh the benefits you're getting from it. 2 copies of Rest in Peace. These are going to primarily be for Phoenix or like a red-black deck that's really invested in the graveyard. The red-black Dreadhorde Arcanist decks, now you need to pay a lot of attention in game 1 as to whether they're really a heavily graveyard-dependent deck or just only a slightly graveyard-dependent deck, and decide whether or not to use Rest in Peace based on that. Also, bear in mind that a lot of them are going to be they're going to switch to being a Hidetsugu Consumes All deck after sideboarding, so they're just going to be inherently boarding away from a graveyard-based strategy. So you definitely want these against Phoenix. You definitely want these if you play against like a Greasefang deck that's trying to cheat a Parhelion in play. I would say you definitely want these. But against actual red-black, you're going to need to use some judgment based on what you think their deck is exactly. 1 Divine Smite. This is a card that I like against Mayhem Devil, against Korvald. If you happen to play it against, an actual black creature deck, it would obviously be great. It's also an instant speed way to interact with Greasefang. I would say this is not a card that is like absolutely necessary in the sideboard, but I do like it. 1 Fateful Absence. This is just to have a little bit of more interaction. That's just always going to work. I don't think you're going to play very many matchups where this is the best piece of interaction you can have, but it does always work, which is pretty nice. So this is a kind of a flexible sideboard card is its main appeal. 2 Gideon Blackblades. This is going to be against like a blue-white control deck, or if you're playing against somebody who is literally trying to do, some kind of combo. Oh, wait, this isn't even the Gideon that does that. Scratch that. This is against blue-white control, but also against if you played like against a white-green enchantment deck. This is basically against people who are going to have a hard time removing it. You could consider playing Wedding Announcement instead if you would prefer. 1 Reidane, which this is just another way to tax your opponent. So this would be against blue-white control, but also if you played against like a deck that was trying to cast Sultai Ultimatum or Indomitable Creativity. There are some combo decks in Historic that rely on casting fairly expensive spells. 3rd Skyclave Apparition, which is, like I said before, I think this is just a better card than Brutal Cathar, and this is a way to get more interaction in your deck when you sideboard. Then 2 Archon of Absolutions, which are basically from the mirror or, any kind of white-based creature deck. I have not been boarding these in against blue-white. the blue-white artifact deck. I don't think they do enough there. But against other white-based creature decks, it's obviously great. And this is another thing you get by not being a collected company-based white-green humans deck. It's you can comfortably board in Archon of Absolutions and Portable Holes, and like I said, you don't have to worry that you're making your collected companies too weak. So that is... That's the deck, that's the sideboard, and I hope I've gone over basically the main point of this build of this deck is that by moving away from playing Collected Company and Inquisitor Captain, we get the Containment Priests, which I do think are strong. You have to bear in mind with the Containment Priest, it is not... It does not stop your opponent from doing their strategy if they're playing Phoenix or Cauldron Familiar because it is fairly fragile, but it does force them to interact with it. It slows them down. If you can flash it in at a key moment, it can be incredibly effective. So it's not a perfect answer to those decks, but it is a good card against those decks. And by switching to a build where we're focused on this as opposed to like the more powerful 4-mana cards, it does give us a lot more flexibility in terms of how to construct the deck and how to sideboard. So with that, let's check this deck out in some games. Always great to be on the play. All right, not a stellar hand. Like I have a 1-2-3 curve, but it's a 1-2-3 curve with not my ideal in 1 and 2 drops. I'm going to keep anyway, just because it's like a 1-2-3 curve. It's pretty hard to mulligan that. If my opponent has a strong draw, or if I draw too many lands, this game will go bad. But I think this is a hand you mostly win with on the play. Also, the opponent mulligan, they appear to be playing blue-white control would be my guess. That's pretty much the only deck that's going to play the irrigated farmland. Two lands as my first 2 draw steps is not ideal at all. I'm going to hope that they don't have Jwari Disruption or Censor. Okay, they don't. That's great. Now I've got a choice in terms of what do I want to get. Esper Sentinel and the Bodyguard would both be fine. Thraben Inspector would be fine. Certainly not Giant Killer or Hopeful Initiate. I think I'm going to get the Inchblade Companion. I don't feel strongly that that's better than the Bodyguard or a Thraben Inspector or an Esper Sentinel, but I think it might be. This is going to give me some resilience against sweepers. Like I said in the deck tag, this is one of those spots with the Ranger-Captain of Eos where you might be tempted to like, oh, I should just be using my Ranger-Captain of Eos here. They're a spell deck and I want to sacrifice it. But I mean, in this spot, it's pretty obvious that you can't sack your 3/3 just to make it so that they can't cast a 3-mana spell on their turn. It might get to the point where it's going to get more appealing to do that. We'll have to see how the game develops. Alright, that was a very interesting draw because that's going to make it so I don't actually want to play the Inchblade Companion. One of the concerns I would have here would be a second Shark Typhoon blocking the Sigardian Evangel, but the Wandering Emperor flashing in and giving first strike is going to defeat that. I'm going to be content just to pass the... I'm gonna cast the Wandering Emperor, whether it's in this combat, in my instep if my opponent taps out, or at the end of their turn. I'm definitely gonna cast it at some point. Alright, Lightning Helix, that thing.
I hope you're ready to lose. Show them how we greet our enemies.
If they have Wrath of God, it's going to be a little bit awkward. But if they cast Wrath of God, I will get to untap with the Wandering Emperor, make a Samurai, play the Inchblade Companion, equip it to the Samurai. So I'll have a reasonably strong board. Concerned about Archmage's Charm stealing something. Let's see what happens with this first. Alright. Mildly annoying.
I've got new moves to teach you.
So I have 6 damage this turn, and then if I animate the Haven and use a +1/+1 counter again, I'll get up to 7 damage. Or I'll get up to 10 damage next turn, never mind. So I no longer have lethal next turn. That was maybe not the best use of my Wandering Emperor for the turn. Could have thought about that a little bit more. It wasn't awful, but I did wind up putting the counter on the creature that they could kill with March of Otherworldly Light. I think I'm just going to make a Samurai this turn. I guess I could have played the Thraben Inspector pre-combat. And then I would have been able to crack the clue.
To me.
I was a little bit concerned that they might just Archmage's Charm it and jump with it, but that was probably not a reasonable play for them to make. This has been a pretty good game. Their draw, they haven't had a sweeper, but they've had 4 pieces of interaction, and this is their second expressive iteration. That's not great for me. think I want to keep my Wandering Emperor above 3 loyalty if I can, just because it means it won't die to a Lightning Helix.
I have practiced against men. Hone your prowess. Remember your training.
This game may be slipping away now.
Energy of battle, then guide with water. My judgment is final.
I may have made too many slightly bad decisions.
Just a trick for this.
So they have access to Archmage's Charm, take the Inspector,
Try not to miss me.
put a counter on it, but they're not going to do that. Interesting. I think that if they had a strong spell in their hand, I think they would have taken the Inspector and put a counter on it. So they might not have much. See if they want to counter this, which they probably will want to counter it. Do I need to use this now? I don't think so. I think I can just make a samurai if they have a spell to live. Worth attacking, I guess.
Keep watch for intruders.
Opponent is not making it easy.
Let's take it back.
Not even a little bit.
May your blade strike true.
So if they have a lightning helix, they would live at 1, I think, because they would get up to 5. And even though I could helix, even though I could plus something, they would just wait and see what got plussed. Containment Priest for the win. Just being 2/2 flash is kind of nice in this matchup. That was a struggle, but they did. That was a game where they had like 2 sweepers and 2 helixes. So obviously Gideon is great here. I don't like the Skyclave Apparition in this matchup. Containment Priest is certainly not at its best in this matchup, but just 2/2 flash human isn't the worst. I am going to cut 1 for a Reidane, though. I don't think I'm going to board in Fateful Absence. It's a consideration, but I think I'm not going to have it in my deck. If you wanted to, you could make room in the sideboard for more cards that are good in this kind of a matchup. I don't really think you need it, but you do wind up having a fair number of like not particularly good cards in your deck. I just think that your core strategy is so good against what those decks are trying to do that you don't need a ton of help. But if you wanted to, you could have like another copy of the Wandering Emperor or another Gideon or a Wedding Announcement, or you could have Inquisitor Captains in your sideboard, something like that. So a really strong hand. My ideal 1-drop into 2-drop start. Question is, how should I sequence it now? I don't really want to get obliterated by an Anger of the Gods, so I think I'll just play a Thalia's Lieutenant to start. If I'm lucky and I draw a land next turn, I'll be able to go like triple 1-drops and get the Thalia's Lieutenant out of range. Anger of the Gods. They're missing a land drop, potentially. So I don't even have to worry about a turn 4 Wrath. I can just dump my hand on the board. Maybe I should play this instead, though. So obviously they didn't have a great hand, but that's kind of, this deck puts you under a lot of pressure very quickly. This is a pretty good hand, but it's not a hand that has Thalia's Lieutenant or Adeline or Ranger-Captain of Eos, sadly. I don't know exactly what my opponent's strategy is here. It could be blue-white control. You don't often see Temple of Enlightenment, but it's not crazy to play with it. They're not blue-white control. They're some sort of Bant deck, hopefully. I'm assuming, given the way the game started, that they're not going to be a deck that has a lot of good targets for this, and I'd rather just have ability to deal damage in play. I was robbed of a point of damage from the Faceless Haven. It's been nerfed. Is it worth throwing my Sentinel in to get 2 extra damage off of the Apparition? I do not think so.
Don't hide from the world. Hurry!
Should I kill Teferi? So I can deal 5 damage, or should I put him to 3? I think I should kill Teferi. It's really risky leaving a Teferi alive when you're going to have to attack a second time.
Let me know if you're up for round 2.
I continue to suspect my opponent is not playing with sweepers, given that they played Paradise Druid. The card they probably have in their hand at this point is Shark Typhoon. Which is not going to go very well if they try to make a 4/4 shark. They make a 3/3 shark somehow. It'll work out well for them. Maybe they have Archmage's Charm and not Shark Typhoon. Wow. They're Sublime Epiphanying my activation of the Faceless Haven. Thankfully, I did that in my first main phase as opposed to like beginning of combat, which the way Arena works by default, you do it in your first main phase rather than going to beginning of combat. But in paper, I might have actually kind of gotten crushed there. So this is another not exactly creatureless deck, but creature light deck. They did have the Hydroid Crisis, though, which is a pretty reasonable target for Skyclave Apparition. So maybe this time I'll shave on some of the Containment Priests. And probably Hopeful Initiate is just a 1/2 that can grow, potentially. So let's shave one of those as well. Where's my 2-drops at? No, back of 1-drop. Could be worse. This deck has 2 legendary creatures in it, Thalia and Adeline, so it is possible to get the cost reduction ability on the Eiganjo, which is nice. Maybe I want to be a little bit respectful of the idea that they could have sweepers post board, but I'm certainly not going to leave my clock at just 2 a turn. If they don't do anything substantial this turn, I might want to be a little bit suspicious. Wandering Emperor is so good. Maybe the answer to what my deck should have in the sideboard is just more copies of the Wandering Emperor.
I've learned much.
If it wasn't for the fact that Thalia makes it more expensive, I would definitely have more. Nice. It's a Nissa deck.
Together we will prevail. Rise, my elemental friend.
Big mistake. Strike fast and strike hard.
Yeah. Guess I'll deal an extra point to the Nissa. They can eat my Inspector at the cost of their Nissa if they want. Yeah, I'm not surprised that wasn't what they were interested in.
Do not test me.
Okay, then.
The land fights for us.
And 2/2 Flash, yet again showing its worth.
I have got new moves to teach you.
I think I want to be guaranteed of killing the Nissa through some sort of removal spell. So I'm going to split my damage.
Will endure. Forgive me.
Esper Sentinel is truly an outrageous card. Still a few cards off the approach of the Second Sun. So they're at 13. If I put a counter there, 3, 6, 9. That's only 12 damage.
Strike fast and strike hard.
We'll be able to cast Thalia as well. Which, had they not blocked... Oh wait, they did have to block. Did I do the math wrong? I did the math wrong. They were forced to block. So the Thalia was always going to keep them off of casting a second approach of the Second Sun in their hand. Is this a Settle the Wreckage style gamer? We can also have a Shark Typhoon. I think I'm going to hang back with my Thalia. Perfect, reasonable hand. This is, well, this could actually be a variety of decks. I was just thinking about, is it possible I actually want to cast the Containment Priest on my turn so it can't be countered? And I think the answer is no. I think if they counter the Containment Priest, I'm going to be happy because that'll mean that the Thalia's Lieutenant gets to resolve. It's another Bant deck. Weird. guess they could have Growth Spiral in their hand. I could also have Sense of Urge or Warrior Disruption, so I'm going to play the Lieutenant first, and then I'll play the Inspector second. It's a pretty healthy clock. They certainly have something. Who knows what it could be, though, at this point? I mean, they probably know. I hope they know. They're not looking at their hand. They should know. Maybe it's just White March. Time for the Hopeful Initiate to go for a march. Brazen Borrower, interesting. So Containment Priest does not stop the flash ability on the Brazen Borrower. It's still a creature being cast, but it does stop Disturb. So if they had a Malevolent Hermit, it would stop that. This is okay. This is some sort of adventure deck. If I play the Containment Priest right now, I get an additional counter on the Hopeful Initiate as well. So I'm dealing 9 damage. Putting them to 7. Do I need to do that? I could do 7 damage and put them to 9. I'm really just worried, do they have some sort of a Wrath effect? The answer is probably they don't, but I also don't think I need to risk it. I think they're pretty likely to need to Wrath this turn, even without the Containment Priest, and then I'll have, I'll get to draw a card, this will hit them for 2, and I'll have the Skyclave Apparition to apply a little bit more pressure, so maybe I still get there through a sweeper. But if I played into this sweeper with the Containment Priest, I wouldn't have the Containment Priest as a follow-up. I'm going to put them to 7. Yeah, I think I'm just going to put them to 7 and I'll flash in a Samurai probably. See what they do. I need the Thalia's Lieutenant to be a giant. If it counted as being a giant, this game would have been easy, because Realm Cloaked Giant does not kill giants. Sadly, Thalia's Lieutenant is not a human giant, it's a human soldier. They're getting another sweeper. Rough.
I'm home. Guards, to me. Show them how we greet our enemies.
I'm gonna see if I can draw land. So if I draw... So if they Wrath, and then I flash in a Containment Priest, and I draw a land, I'll have lethal with the Cave of the Frost Dragon. Yikes. Teferi Time Raveler. But they're not going to have enough mana to Wrath. Alright.
Let's slow this down.
Probably an untapped land, which all of my lands would come into play untapped at this point. We'll kill them. I guess the Skyclave Apparition, getting rid of the Fae of Wishes, and then putting a counter on the Containment Priest is pretty likely to kill them too. They're getting priority, but it could just be because they can activate the Fae of Wishes.
We've got the edge in this fight.
They did have March of Otherworldly Light. So, are they 100% forced to Wrath? I think they are. They can... does this thing still let you Wrath at instant speed if you plus it? Yeah, it does. Seems like they should have done that. Cave of the Frost Dragon isn't lethal, though. They can flash into Brazen Borrower to chump block. Another Fae of Wishes. This is starting to get kind of ugly.
May your blade strike true.
Hopefully they're going to be forced to minus the Teferi Time Raveler to bounce something. Presumably the Samurai. Just so I can have it off the board and not have to worry about it anymore. If they aren't forced and they get to plus it again, then next turn they'll get to minus it without it dying. And probably things will just be completely untenable from there. Oh, so they can do a play where they plus this to bounce this back to their hand, or they minus to bounce this back to their hand. That's not good for me. Needed to draw a land. I could win if the top card of my deck is Sigardian Evangel. Playing this doesn't really do anything. Let's get the 5 power. I guess I can make this big enough that they have to chump it. That doesn't really seem very effective, but I'll try it. Let's see if this is a Sigardian Evangel first. It's not. It's a Thalia. I don't think that really does anything.
Remember your training.
Land would continue to be a great draw because it would mean that the Cave of the Frost Dragon could force them to chump with the Brazen Borrower. And I got screwed yet again that Thalia's Lieutenant does not count as a giant. You can't put counters on your opponent's stuff, right? You can. Do I want to do that? Seems good.
We've got the edge in this fight.
It both protects my Wandering Emperor from taking damage from that thing, and it also means that just the land continues to have the chance to just be lethal. Might want access to the giant killer just to tap whatever. If they just play a big dumb creature, I'll probably want to tap it. Is it finally over? Have I done it? That was hard fought. That was a lot of sweepers to fight through. Yet again, I want these. So this could hit Lucky Clover. They might have Edgewall Innkeeper in their deck too. I think we're going to leave these Skyclave Apparitions in my deck. I think Hopeful Initiate's kind of bad. And I'll trim on Containment Priests as well. This is an extremely friendly one-drop to play on the first turn. It's just a cute little insect. I'm still going to do it, though. It is kind of lame that it's not a human, because it does make the Thalia's Lieutenant a lot worse. I'll certainly be playing Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, on turn 2 over the Lieutenant, I would say. Unless I draw that one. This is a good one to draw. That is the strategy of my deck, is to draw this and play it on the first turn. Okay. So one card I have to bear in mind that they could have here is Brazen Borrower. And that means I definitely want to attack before I cast the Thalia. I'm going to cast the Thalia. They won't be able to Brazen Borrower the Thalia because it will cost 1 extra by the time it's in place. They might Brazen Borrower the Sentinel. So the fact that I attacked first means I get to deal the damage in that case. Okay, they didn't have Brazen Borrower, but had they had Brazen Borrower instead, I would have potentially been +1 damage there. They also might have just decided not to use the Brazen Borrower at all for their turn. They are an Edgewall Innkeeper deck. And their Fate Wishes deck. Interesting. So I'll give them the option of trading their Innkeeper for a 2/2 Sentinel if they want to. They can't trade with the Thalia. So what's this? Could be Shark Typhoon. It's not Brazen Borrower. They wouldn't have shocked for Brazen Borrower. I think it must be Shark Typhoon. I think I'm just going to make the Thalia big enough that it can attack through the Fae of Wishes and let them do what they want. I definitely want to save this until I have 4 mana. Also, the Inchblade Companion is a little bit of resilience to a sweeper. They probably won't be able to cast their Realmcloak Giant next turn, but maybe they had enough Wraths in their sideboard that they boarded one in. They could have done that in response. Felidar Retreat. That is not a very good card. Should I Apparition it? Seems unnecessary. I guess if they have a Wrath, it's kind of bad for me. I think if they play a sweeper this turn, I'm going to lose. If they play Authority of the Consuls this turn, it will have no effect on the game whatsoever. Alright, that's going to do it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed this look into White Weenie. As you can see, I've gotten I started fairly high on the ladder, but I've been playing this deck a bunch, and I managed to stay pretty high on the ladder. So it is a pretty strong deck, even though I got to play against a couple of oddball decks today. I had one matchup that was against Jeskai Control that was, that's a pretty normal matchup, and then a couple of oddball matchups. But the oddball matchups, the people did have sweepers, and so they were able to put up a fight. Hope you liked the video, and if you did, please remember to sub to the channel. I try to put out a couple videos each week, and if you don't sub, you might miss them. Then who knows what would happen after that. Talk to you next time.